I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to present ourselves as the federal state, because when thinking about our federal state, not many might think about North Rhine-Westphalia, which is perceived more as an industrial site. Our federal state, even though you might not believe it, is one of the 5 federal states with the largest forest area. And also due to the tree species that we have, we are one of the federal states with the biggest stock. So when talking about our federal state, we are talking about quite a potential. Now, taking a look at what has happened at material level over the last years, we see that logging operations until 2017 have stayed at more or less the same level, but you can also see the bars that are the result of the last 3 years. The minister just mentioned it. Our federal state is one of the federal states most severely affected by climate change and damages to the forests. So you can see the high bars here reaching 14 million of cubic meters of damaged wood. So these are huge losses in our timber stock. Climate change has reached Europe. There's no doubt about it. Between the years 2018 and 2020, about 32 million cubic meters of wood were damaged, and we are now faced with a forest area of 70,000 hectares that need to be reforested. And regarding our trees, species spruce, there is a stock loss of 40%. So these figures are shocking. And in the long term, of course, we will have to deal with this in our projects for the future. So the question is, what are we doing currently for the implementation at local level, and what advantages does the Charter bring for our federal state? Of course, it is about value-added chains, increased cooperation, research and development, innovation, knowledge and technology transferred, and we have a lot of research sites in our federal state. And of course, we are interested in securing the resource of wood in the long term, implementing it into our industry processes, because it is a very important industry sector in our federal state. We want to maintain it and increase it. And we also want to see increased and improved networking and cooperation. Of course, digitalization plays a huge role here. Not least the coronavirus pandemic and this event have shown us that there are new opportunities for cooperation and an exchange of views. And of course, in the wood-based sector, we want to tap this potential as well. So taking a look at the value-added chain for wood in our federal state, we are talking about 162,000 employees subject to social insurance requirements. There's a turnover of about 42 billion euro per year. That is about a quarter of what Ms. Müller stated for the federal level. We have important centers and hubs of the wood-based material industry, prefabricated timber construction industry, and sawmill and wood-based material industry. We have efficient producers of wood processing machines, and this cluster also plays a role in CO2 sequestration. According to recent studies, it is 18 million tons of CO2 per year that is being fixed in our federal state. So we need to praise the achievements of this cluster. It is oftentimes not perceived, and we try to put it in the center of attention. The first sector that I would like to mention is the sawmilling industry. We saw a drop here as well. There's a turnover of 709 million euros per year and more than 2,500 employees. And this cluster, the sawmilling industry, which is located in the south of North Rhine-Westphalia in the Sauerland region, of course also receives its supply from the neighboring federal states, from an area of 150 to 200 kilometers. So we are talking about other federal states such as Lower Saxony, Hesse, etc. And at the moment, due to the fact that we are severely affected by wood damages, our sawing mills have been working at 130% of their capacity since 2017. Let's talk about the next sector, the wood-based material industry. The turnover is 1.25 billion euro per year. The workforce is also larger, more than 6,000 employees. And looking at wood-based material industry, there's one particularity here that might not be known that much. There is a turnover of 2 billion. And also we are now talking about timber construction, excuse me. The turnover here is more than 2 billion. However, there are not that much timber construction operations, but there is still a huge potential, particularly in our federal state. Of course, we have cooperations with different sectors as well, different areas, and there are many projects also with the federal government. Our federal state has its own research and development sites, and we are dependent on cooperation with others. And this platform that the federal government has launched allows us to do that. The federal government also helped us in establishing a site of the European Forest Institute in Bonn. So we were always open and looked at what could be improved, at other similar projects in Europe, etc. I personally took part in the launch event in Bilbao in November last year. And this shows that there are always similar questions being raised at European level that can be adapted in our country, in our federal state as well, and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that we can simply adapt ideas that have already been developed. We are also a regular participant of trade fairs where our small and medium-sized wood companies are represented and can present their products to a worldwide audience. As regards research in the Aachen area, of course, there is research being conducted in the wood sector. There is the University of Aachen, the Center for Wood Research, located at the Technical University in Cologne. So there are a lot of approaches for this issue of wood and forestry in our federal state. So how did we approach this process of implementation? In 2019, Dr. Müller mentioned it already. We have participated for a long time now in these cluster and charter processes. So based on our cluster study, which was updated in 2019, we decided to launch a participatory process and tried to include all stakeholders and bring them together, all stakeholders of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, because we saw a necessity there to implement everything that had been launched with the charter in our different networks and raising attention to the different results that had already been achieved. So we conducted several workshops at different locations in our federal state that focused on various topics based on ideas that had been raised. For example, the issue of workforce shortage was addressed in one of the workshops. We talked about urban construction with wood-based materials because the urban sector is quite densely populated. There are 11 million inhabitants in our cities and urban metropolises. We talked about product innovations in one of our workshops and also regional supply with raw materials, climate adaptation, etc. This shows the extensive scope of this field of action, and based on that, we also developed an action plan. At the end of 2020, this action plan was presented. And on the day of the presentation, we held a digital cluster conference. There was no other way than the virtual way. We used the media and tools that were available to us because we wanted to advance the process and continue it, and took the results from this cluster conference to the different areas and stakeholders. And the reception was very well, and we are also convinced that it was the right choice not to work until we would have been able to hold a face-to-face conference. So where do we want to go? At the moment, we are in the process of launching proHolz.NRW, which is one of the central elements of our action plan. And then in the following, we want to be able to implement our different projects in cooperation with our projects. What we don't want to see in our federal state is a unilateral participation of different stakeholders from the federal state government. What we want to see is an increased participation of the different stakeholders going beyond the charter process. We want to build networks between the different groups in order to actually implement their requirements and needs. In the past, our cluster process had a more regional approach, but we had to realize also within the scope of our discussions of the last years that it is necessary, or that it was indeed necessary, to achieve better networking within our federal state. And this proHolz initiative will be concluded this year. Based on this process, we will then continue our work and launch important initiatives. In conclusion, let me state that we are very thankful to the federal government for having launched this charter process, because we were able to use it as a starting point 2 years ago and established a new research center. And we're able to extend it to a federal statewide project. And we hope that the future charter process will also bring about new initiatives, and we hope that proHolz NRW will then be able to implement it at local level. Thank you.